Back. Sorry for that. Don't know what happened. It's live video, and you never know what's going to happen. So,
I did pay the power bill.
you did pay the power. I don't know where it's broadcasting to now. But anyway, I guess let's see. We don't have any viewers right now, so oh boy. There we go. Okay, I think we're at it. We're going now. All right. So sorry about that. We're back, and we had a little bit of a glitch, so no big deal. Welcome back to the program. So where were we? I don't know. I mean,
Sheridan.
Thanks.
In this
super
fancy downtown studio.
fancy downtown studio with all sorts of buttons that Ken could push. All right. Well, anyway, continuing with the program. So if you're all right, so we got a listener. All right, we're good. All right, so let's go to the cow pie. And this is a piece where, again, the Political Action Committee, formerly known as the Cowboy State Daily. And why do I call them that? Well, they've switched from just news coverage or opinion journalism, which is pretty much what they were doing before, to straight out political advocacy. Yesterday, it was a defense of Eric Barlow, and a poorly done one, by the way. Had they even read the bill that they used to defend Eric Barlow, probably would have been a little bit easier on them because they wouldn't have published a whole bunch of bull crap. You see, often what happens is the cow pie, they pick their guy. And this is one of the reasons why I don't think that newspapers or news outlets should endorse candidates. Now, I'm not saying anything about the history of newspapers because historically, most newspapers have endorsed candidates. Okay, I'm a nerd, so I think this is a fun experiment. Maybe you won't. But if you look up the names of historic newspapers, you're going to find stuff, and I'm just, pulling these out of thin air. But you're going to find stuff like the Philadelphia Republican, the Cleveland Democrat. I mean, most newspapers were very partisan, and they definitely did advocate for their candidate. But that doesn't mean that I think that they should. Now, they've got an opinion page. I see no problem with the opinion page saying, hey, our editorial board made a decision, and as far as the opinion page goes, we're supporting these folks. I don't know how you split that, Adam. How you say, well, it's just the editorial board is endorsing these candidates and not the rest of them. But anyway, I just don't think that's wise because then your writing tends to benefit your preferred candidate, and in this case. The cow pie, yesterday it was Eric Barlow. Today they're defending Americans for Prosperity. It's fascinating, too, because usually you have a candidate. No. In this case, they're defending a political action committee. Here's what they say. And I quote, the Wyoming Freedom Caucus claims that the national group Americans for Prosperity is attacking true conservatives running for the state legislature. Americans for Prosperity's Wyoming-based director Tyler Lindholm disputes that, saying Freedom Caucus-aligned legislators aren't always conservative. Headquartered in Virginia, Americans for Prosperity is a major player in Wyoming's primary election cycle, influencing voters' choices between different Republicans. Last election, they spent $334,000. In some races, they spent close to $100,000. So, I mean, and that's just ballpark, I think, in the Senate 22 race. And again, this is just back of the envelope math, but I took all the mailers that I received and that were, the ones that they were smart enough not to send to me, figured, okay, $3,500 for each one of them, send it to a whole Senate district, add up the numbers, and it equaled out to be about $80,000. So just back of the envelope math. Well, across the state, they spent $334,000. Now, quoting again from the cow pie, that wasn't as much as another Virginia-based group, which differs from AFP and often backs Freedom Caucus-aligned candidates, Make Liberty Win. Make Liberty Win spent $371,000. Okay, so that doesn't matter. So in the piece, when you're crafting an argument, that's considered a yeah, but. And you see this a lot on Facebook. You might be arguing about one candidate, and you'll see a comment that says something to the effect of, yeah, but this other guy did it too. Okay, well, that doesn't address the argument that you're talking about. So, first, Claire McDuff, who wrote this article, she says, yeah, but Make Liberty Win spent more. Well, that doesn't address the original claim that Americans for Prosperity is endorsing redcoats. That's what they do. I can give you a big, long list of them. And probably the best example of that was published on the Open Range Record 2 days ago. And let me just show you here. And I know I published it. Yeah, see, right here. So in the article, we published this list, and I did an in-depth study of all of the amendments on House Bill 1, so all of the amendments on the budget that were voted for in the House of Representatives. And you'll notice that most of the people that Americans for Prosperity endorsed ended up being the big giant spenders. So one of those is right here. That's Julie Jarvis, $1.244 billion. Marilyn Connolly, $1.241 billion. J.T. Larson, $1.238 billion. Now, why are these numbers significant? Well, government spending is, by definition, creating more government, right? How do you create more government? Well, you have to spend more money. You create a new program. You hire more people. So spending money is, by definition, big government. Now, let's go down to the so-called the Freedom Caucus people. And, these are just the conservatives, and you all know that I reject the whole argument that just because you vote the same way, you're part of the Freedom Caucus. We know that's a bunch of crap. It's not true. But just look at some of the actual Freedom Caucus people, like Agent 29. Well, Agent 29, if I can get that selected, there we go. Agent 29 voted to spend $19 million in amendments. 19.
And I was only going to get to keep about 10 of that.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, you have to pay yourself, right? But Agent 29, he spent 19. AFP endorsed Julie Jarvis, $1.244 billion. That's billion with a B. Now, if you look at and let me just go back to the article here. So these are this section right here is all of the AFP endorsed incumbents that they endorsed last year. These are all the folks. Look at the spending. The average amount of spending on HB1 was $845 million. Now, how could you possibly claim that any of those are conservative? I mean, generally speaking, when you say the conservative, most people see dollar signs in their head because you're spending conservatively, you're acting conservatively, you're not being outrageous in your spending, except for these people. I guess I should point that. There you go. Those folks right there. But all of AFP's endorsed candidates very much are big government people, which is interesting when you look at, let's see here, their main advertising, which is that. Big government is bull. You'll see that advertisement pretty much everywhere. If indeed they believe that big government is bull, why are they endorsing all these people that are definitely big government liberals?
Beyond big government, they are big business. They got upset when we began to put any sort of limitations. One of them was wind and solar.
Yeah.
We said wind and solar should pay their fair share. They should be taxed just like anything else, and even the playing field, so everybody's playing by the same rules.
Right, exactly.
And we were punished for that. We were punished for suggesting that the people of Wyoming should vote before Reliant could allow or could make Wyoming into an international dumping ground for nuclear fuel. And we were hammered for that. Same thing with whenever you have a massive company that is trying to get benefits, PWXT with $100 million out of the governor's slush fund, those are the things they want. They don't want small businesses. They don't represent those up-and-comers. This is one of those organizations that is out there trying to maintain the stranglehold on business that certain companies have, that they wield the power and the strength. And if you do anything to try to even the playing field, they're going to come after you.
Yes, exactly
That's AFP.
Right. Okay, so that kind of gives you the broad strokes of who AFP typically endorse. Now, after the break, we're going to come back, and I've got some sound bites that I'm going to play for you from Americans for Prosperity. So let's go ahead and take a break, an actual one this time. And when we come back, we'll continue with the program. AFP, those big government folks, man. I'll tell you why here in just a second. The following ad was paid for by Brent Bean for governor.
This is Brent Bean, a Republican for governor. Wyoming families know what matters: law enforcement, emergency services, and supporting strong schools, agriculture, and energy production. But state government keeps growing while priorities fight for resources. That has to change. We don't have a revenue problem. We have a spending and priority problem. Vote for me on August 18th, and I'll put Wyoming priorities first. I'll return taxes to you, the taxpayer, and make Wyoming number one. Paid for by Brent Bean for governor.
Today's program is also brought to you by Morton Buildings. If you're in the market for any type of building for your property, you need to call Marcos and Jesse at Morton Buildings. Their phone number is 307-674-2532. They're the best in metal building construction, and they've been doing it longer than anybody else around. So it doesn't matter if it's a garage or a barn or maybe something bigger, like a roping arena or maybe a giant warehouse for your business. The two guys you need to call first are Marcos and Jesse. Again, their phone number is 307-674-2532, or you can check them out on their website, mortonbuildings.com. Welcome back to the program, Cowboy State Politics Live on a Thursday. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Thank you for everything you do for this media platform, including the Open Range Record. Man, we've been publishing a lot of great articles, and before the break, we were talking about one that I think it was from 2 days ago, maybe 3 days ago. I've lost count, but it was all about Americans for Prosperity and how big of spenders their incumbents are. But that kind of leaves out the discussion of who didn't win. Well, one of their big candidates that was supported, and for the life of me, I can't figure out why they endorsed this person, but it's Jackie Van Mark. So Jackie Van Mark was a pretty high up in the Liz Cheney campaign. She was one of their state level folks. Take a listen to this. This is what she said about Liz Cheney. Take a listen.
Is at stake in this election if Liz Cheney loses?
Well, we've got another 2 years till a presidential election. Maybe there's someone else in the Republican Party that can beat him. I would like to see it to be her. I think she would be fantastic.
Yeah, I bet Liz Cheney would be fantastic. Now, that's kind of the mild soundbite, because I've got another one where Jackie Van Mark says that she's so Republican, she has a tattoo of an R on her hind end. I'm not even kidding you. Hey, Ken, send me a message later on today and remind me to grab that soundbite, and we'll play it tomorrow on the program. But AFP doesn't really have that great of a record endorsing conservatives because they're not conservative. So, and the guy that runs it, Tyler Lindholm, when he was in the House of Representatives, he absolutely voted in favor of a carbon capture bill, one of the most destructive bills that's been passed this decade in the Wyoming legislature was 2020's House Bill 200, and it mandated carbon capture on Wyoming coal-fired power plants. And Ken, if you'll show my screen again, there's the vote record from House Bill 200, and you can see Tyler Lindholm. There he is on the right-hand side, underlined. He absolutely voted for House Bill 200. Now, later, just to be entirely fair, that was first reading. So he helped get the thing on the floor, and then he voted against it. He also is in favor of legalizing marijuana. He tried to pass House Bill 234 in 2019. That would have removed all felonies from marijuana. Now, you might be thinking, well, that's fine. You know, I don't really care if somebody smokes a joint. But what this bill would do is remove all felonies, including marijuana trafficking. So no matter what the quantity was, you could have 16 pounds sitting in your closet, and it would only be a misdemeanor. So we're not exactly dealing with a guy that knows what conservatism is, nor are the people that he has endorsed all that conservative, and let's talk about it. So from the cowpie, the primary tends to be more decisive in Wyoming because it is a Republican, blah, blah, blah. We all know that. None of AFP's picks are known Freedom Caucus members. So one of them is Evie Brennan. Evie Brennan is a senator, and she's running against Daniel Singh. Now, Daniel Singh was endorsed by AFP, but up until, I don't know, last 6 months or whatever, maybe 8 months, he was a member of the Freedom Caucus until he, we'll just say he chose to go a different way. But definitely, and if you look at the spending, Daniel Singh is on the lower end of the spending in the House of Representatives. Then there's Julie Jarvis. How could you possibly argue that someone who voted to spend $1.244 billion as opposed to, the $25,000 that, the rest of the conservatives spent? How could you possibly say she's conservative?
If you wanted to suggest, there are other things you got to look at too, please do.
Oh, yeah.
Every time she voted, it was the wrong way.
Oh, man.
It was amazing.
Full-blown communist from the word go.
She and Marilyn Connolly had about the most perfect wrong records.
Yeah, I mean, she voted, I can't tell you how many times she voted in favor of trying to get around the ban on gender transition surgeries in Wyoming. She even tried to change the law so that you could choose your sex on your birth certificate. That's Julie Jarvis. Don't forget about those. I mean, the What is a Woman Act, she was a big opponent of that. The porn in schools. There are so many things that Julie Jarvis voted on that don't in any way, aren't even in the same universe as conservatism. Let's see here. Ogden Driscoll. They've endorsed him against Speaker of the House, Chip Nyman. There are lots of articles we've published on the Open Range Record that clearly show you exactly who Ogden Driscoll is. Probably the biggest one is him negotiating a way where he could get millions of dollars from the state of Wyoming for a conservation easement when he still controlled the land, when he could still develop it, when he could still do whatever he wanted with it right over by Devil's Tower, and yet the state paid him, I think the number was actually $1 million. Former Representative Tony Nemec against Marlene Brady. Marlene Brady has one of the best spending records in the House of Representatives. Let's see here. I think let me show it to you. It's way down here. Where is she?
I see her.
There she is, right here. Marlene Brady only voted to spend $18 million, as opposed to the $1.244 billion of Julie Jarvis.
And again, in Marlene's case, her votes are impeccable.
Yeah, her voting record is
across
great.
Everything else.
Taxes, except for Convention of States. But other than that, she does a pretty good job. Tony Nemec, when he was in the House of Representatives, he had a voting record of voting with the Democrat Party 80% of the time. Actually, I think it was like 79 point something. Over 75% of the time, he voted with the Democrat majority in the House of Representatives, and yet AFP endorsed him. Let's see here. Troy Claycomb in Upton. Troy Claycomb has refused to show up to any forums or debates or anything, except for, he was supposed to be at one last night. I'm not exactly sure. I haven't heard if he showed up on that one or not. Let's see here. Melissa Butcher. Oh, Ken, you ought to know her. Melissa Butcher is running against Agent 29. She's advocated for all sorts of crazy stuff. I mean, claims to be a conservative, but there's no evidence whatsoever. She's a big business development person.
She has absolutely no track record on anything.
No.
So
no.
you have to kind of judge her by who's pushing her and when it's coming from. So,
Well, you know what,
like,
though? That's not entirely accurate because she does have a record. She's a big Chamber of Communists person.
Well, that's
I mean, that's pretty much
Yeah.
the big argument there. She is absolutely in favor of state intervention in the private market. I mean, that ought to be the hallmark thing that AFP would be against. But they're not. Why? Because Agent 29 is a conservative.
that's the alternative. That you keep talking about, they voted with the Democrats, and there's that. But I think a lot of them just voted against us.
Yeah, probably. But it says a lot that none of their endorsements are conservatives. None of their people are low spenders. None of them are social conservatives. They're all wacko liberal people.
They're crony capitalists.
Crony capitalists. That's a good way to put it. So the article goes on. Casper Representative Bill Alamand, against whom AFP has launched numerous mailers, told the Cowboy State Daily Political Action Committee that the group has come out against conservative candidates and wants to end the Freedom Caucus. Here's what he says, quote, "They want to destroy the movement of the Freedom Caucus, which is very conservative, anti-tax, pro-family," said Alamand. In all their publications, they say how conservative they are, but yet they've endorsed the least conservative people. Now, here's what very liberal Tyler Lindholm had to say. Quote, "We don't look at caucus alignment," he said. "If this was an anthem against the Freedom Caucus, we'd be in the Freedom Caucus aligned Representative Ocean Andrew race." Well, they were last year. They would be supporting Cam Wright. Would be in the Steve Johnson race supporting Luke Reiner. Now, okay, so maybe those two are true, but what about all the others that he supported? I mean, there are so many examples of AFP endorsing, very, very much crony capitalist people, very much big spenders, very much big government folks. But yet you don't see that analysis here, except Lindholm says, "Being pro-business is a huge factor," said Lindholm. "Absolutely. Economics, first and foremost," he said. "Simplifying regulations in healthcare and improving school choice are also AFP's goals." Lindholm said the Wyoming Freedom Caucus members want people to think they're conservative, but they're really not. Okay, how many people voted for the ESA bill, Ken? How many conservatives voted for him? All but like two?
Yeah, most of them.
Most of them. Okay,
Yeah.
I think it was a bad bill. Ken thinks it's a bad bill, but most of the conservatives voted for it. All right, so that checks that box. What about, let's see, what else did he say? Simplifying regulations in healthcare. Get the government out of the way. There are so many ways that you can check that box. How many times have we defeated Medicaid expansion? Okay, admittedly, with the help of some of the redcoats, but how many times have conservatives voted against that bill? Who are the people that are advocating for tort reform? Now, those are all conservatives. Lindholm said that Freedom Caucus think they're the gold standard, but they're not always conservative. By whose definition?
Yeah,
What definition are you using, Tyler?
You can see that in their attack ads. You can see where they're trying to say, we're trying to impose burdensome regulations on business and those things. And when you actually look at the facts, it's all fabricated BS.
Yeah, all of this is bullcrap. And by the way, Tyler, Lindholm, baby, if you want to come on this show, you are more than welcome.
You have to do it in your studio because you ain't coming in here.
I'll give you an hour. I'll give you the whole program to come and talk about how conservative you aren't. It's an open invitation, buddy. Anytime you want. Let's see here. Next on the agenda, since I'm tired of talking about Tyler Lindholm.
You're tired.
Yeah, well, you've been reading his ads
I go out door to door and I see hanging on everybody's doors his material. I don't know what they're spending in my race, but it's staggering.
A lot.
Yeah.
I can't wait to see. Well, and we're going to have to do a little bit of get out the abacus to figure it out because Americans for Prosperity is a federal PAC, They don't report their expenses in the state of Wyoming. It's all federal stuff. And really, it's always just the total. Though sometimes there's a notation that it says, spent in this district. Not all the time. Most of it is just totals. All right. Cool. So let's kind of switch gears just a little bit. And let's see, right? 10 minutes left. Yeah, I can do this one. So there's a piece on Fox News, and this is something that has probably not been on your radar. And the truth is, it's probably not on very many people's radar at all. But Ken, when is the last time? I mean, you were in D.C. pretty recently. Did you go to the Smithsonian at all?
No, I did not go in. It used to be you could basically walk up to the Smithsonian and go in and see whatever you wanted to see.
Right.
There are so many people there now, and especially this year, building up to the fair, that you have to basically book a reservation. And I didn't have enough free time to do that.
Okay.
I have in the past been in the Smithsonian, and I wanted to go in and see if there were little placards.
Well, there are.
Yeah.
And so museums, and this is why, okay, so I personally think that libraries and museums, like you have a county museum and a county library, not all museums. I think that is, that ought to be at least, a necessary thing that every county has. I really do think that. Libraries, definitely, that's a function of government, I think. And museums, I think that they ought to be in the group too. But the problem is who it is that you have running your museum. You see, history is just is. It's not good or bad, right? Whatever you're looking at, it just is, and you have to take everything in context. Now, when you start judging the past by today's standards, well, I call that historiography, right? You're using your own personal beliefs to judge what happened 100 or 200 or 300 years ago,
or 2,000 years
or
ago.
2,000 years ago, for that matter. And this is where you start getting into the whole, Thomas Jefferson owned slaves. Yep, he did. George Washington owned slaves. Yeah, that's absolutely true. But what is left out is how big of an effort those two made to end the slave trade. And how many times King George absolutely said that he wasn't going to allow them to do that. If you read the Declaration of Independence, one of those lines in there that made it into the final version is that he has refused his assent to laws. And I didn't quote it exactly, but what they're talking about is laws passed in the colonial legislatures. The king would say no go on those. And I think that George Washington, at least twice, perhaps three times, in the Virginia House of Burgesses, tried to end slavery. But the king told him no. Now, did he own slaves until the day he died? Yep, that's absolutely true. Well, part of the context on that is that he, after the Revolutionary War, he argued, and if you read his writing, he called slavery a stain on his soul. But, had he freed all of his slaves, well, it would have financially ruined him. Okay, so we could look back and say, the man owned slaves till the day he died. Come on, how good of a guy is he? Okay, by today's standards, well, that's probably not a good thing. But if you look back into the time in which he lived, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, the rest of our founders did more to end slavery in this country than anybody else in history. It's absolutely a fact. Well, you have to judge history in the time that it happened. What was happening then? We get this argument about the Second Amendment all the time. Well, our founders never could have conceived of an AR-15. Okay, maybe not exactly how it would look, but they absolutely were smart enough to know that technology would progress way further than it existed at their time. And one of the reasons why the Constitution is written the way that it is they were smart enough to know that things are going to change. That's why you have phrases in there like cruel and unusual punishment. What the heck is that? We don't have a definition of what that is. We have a definition of what we think cruel and unusual punishment is. But 200 years ago, tar and feathering, maybe that was a good thing. The electric chair, at one point, we thought that was a great way to execute people. But now most states have said, no, we're not using the electric chair anymore. So the times change, and so too do the sentiments of the people that live in that specific time. And so you've got to judge history by the time in which it happened.
Yeah, there was a time when slaves owned slaves.
Absolutely. The
So-
first legal slave owner in America was a guy named Antonio Johnson. In fact, he was an indentured servant for a while. And he served his time, got out. He was given a plot of land. He was a tobacco farmer. And he became the largest slave trader in the colonies at that time. Well, one of the reasons why you probably haven't heard of him is Antonio Johnson was black. The first legal slave in Wyoming, slave owner, rather, was a black man. It was Antonio Johnson. So, now the Smithsonian.
They named the county after him.
yeah. The county to our south. Anyway, so the Smithsonian. I was there probably 10 years ago, and I happened upon a Thomas Jefferson. It was a big, let's celebrate Thomas Jefferson. And there was a big display about his lineage. And I was with my dad, and we walked over to it, and in Thomas Jefferson's lineage, need to put that in quotation marks, it says Sally Hemings, and there's all of Sally Hemings's offspring, or her children. So, Ken, another question for you, Ken. How does one determine paternity? Do you know that one? Most men should know this, by the way. This should be Man 101 to know this one.
Same way you determine who's a witch. Oh, he looks like one.
She's a witch. Burn her. No. To determine paternity, you have to have a male heir. And Thomas Jefferson had no male heirs. And so there is no way to determine whether or not Thomas Jefferson did father a child with Sally Hemings. Yet, just about every history book in this country says that indeed that is a fact. Well, it's not a fact. The only thing that we can prove through DNA is that somebody in Thomas Jefferson's family had an affair with Sally Hemings. That's the only thing that we can prove. Now, it could have been Thomas Jefferson's brother, could have been Thomas Jefferson, but it is not a fact. So I'm standing there with my dad in the Smithsonian, and I pointed to the wall, and I explained this whole thing to him, and he just looks at it, and he goes, "But David, this is in the Smithsonian. This has to be true." Maybe not necessarily. From Fox News. After an explosive series of congressional hearings on alleged woke ideological capture at the Smithsonian, a resurfaced video of a presentation by the National Museum of American History director Anthea Hartig shows her calling history as a practice and calls it a prime tool of social justice. In a series of July hearings on Capitol Hill, Hartig defended the Smithsonian's record of objectivity and nonpartisanship. However, in the Surface presentation to the University of California, Los Angeles students in February of 25, Hartig described, quote, a number of ways in which your National Museum of American History is taking an equity-based, justice-forward, community-driven, and necessarily humble approach to public history and to service. In other words, using historical events and changing them to fit the time in which we live to further an argument that we've come up with. So, Ken, go ahead and play the video of the Anthea Hartig, and I think it's called Smithsonian. But go ahead and play that. And I should have just recorded the audio because there's not much to the video.
History as a practice, as David has shared so beautifully, some grounding and essential questions, is for me a prime tool of social justice. It's also in the way in which I've grown personally. It continues to grow resolute in my mind. And it is the key that unlocks the mysteries of humanity, of meaning, of place, of conquest, of love, of power, authority, and self.
Right. So history as a tool of social justice. Now, remember, history just is. It isn't good or bad. It just is. And when you change the events of the past to fit your narrative, it doesn't become history at all. It becomes social justice. It becomes advocacy. You see, you've got to study history for what it is. Let me give you another example. The 1619 Project. That was not created by a historian. In fact, it was created by a New York Times reporter in quotation marks, but claimed that our country began in 1619. It absolutely did not. Our country began technically when the Declaration of Independence was signed. Now, you could claim that that another date would be after the Constitution was ratified, but really, when the colonies said, we're done with England, we're signing this declaration, that's when it happened, in 1776, not in 1619. Now, that same study also claims that America is a pro-slavery country. Well, that's not true at all. Not true at all. Most of our founders, while they did own slaves, fought over and over and over to end the practice of slavery. This is why it's so important to read the first draft of the Declaration of Independence. The largest section in it is a diatribe about how terrible slavery is. And it was excluded from the official version of the Declaration of Independence because the southern colonies wouldn't have approved it otherwise. So what did our founders do? They created what I call historical time bombs in the Constitution. One of those is the 3/5 Compromise. There's another one in Article 5 where it says you can't outlaw slavery before 1808. Why that date? Well, that's just a date that they agreed upon to where the abolitionist North could start the process of getting rid of slavery. The 3/5 Compromise, this is always a fascinating one for me because they were trying to figure out representation in Congress. And initially, the idea was that representation would be based on the ownership of property. Well, the guys in the South, they thought that was a fantastic idea because they would have a virtually unlimited list of property, slaves. Well, the guys in the North, they realized their error, and when they came back the next morning, they too had a list of all of their property, chairs and chickens and cows and houses and land, and they made sure that it was a bigger list than the guys in the South. And so then they decided, well, property ownership is probably a bad way to figure out representation in Congress, and so they decided on population. Well, the compromise was that the slave population represented 3/5 of that a slave represented 3/5 of an actual vote. Here's why. The population of the North was growing at a faster rate than the population of the South. And our founders knew that. And so they knew that at some point, like 1808, that they would have more votes in Congress than the Southern colonies, and they would be able to outlaw slavery. That's why it's in there. So unless you understand history in the time it was written, you can conclude a whole bunch of different things that are absolutely erroneous, that aren't true at all. And when you have the director of the nation's biggest museum being a pro-social justice person who absolutely says she's using the museum, as a tool, well, then you know that you're not getting an accurate representation of history. Now, let me give you one that's a little bit local. Now, living in Sheridan County now, I get a very different view of the Johnson County Cattle War. It was the rustlers, so-called rustlers, in Johnson County and Kendrick up here in Sheridan County. Everywhere you go in Sheridan, it's Kendrick this, Kendrick that, Kendrick Golf Course, Kendrick Park, Kendrick Mansion, Kendrick all over the place. Well, I have a very different view because I grew up in Johnson County, where Kendrick tried to kill people because they started a different stock growers association. That's why. And so you have to understand the events of that time, and you have to understand all of the really terrible stuff that John Kendrick did during that time to figure out whether he's a good guy or a bad guy. Truth is, he's a really bad guy. And I've had so many conversations with people that live here in Sheridan who never heard the other side of the story, who grew up in Sheridan thinking that, hey, man, we'll go look at the Kendrick Mansion and check out the garden. Wasn't he a fantastic fellow? Well, why don't you hear the other side of what he did?
There's another interesting thing here in Sheridan County. And if you went back 15 years ago and you walked into the Sheridan County Museum, it had a certain flavor to it.
Yep.
a certain perspective on society. And I'm not saying I'm right or wrong. It's just that's the way it was. Recently, I would say 8 to 10 years ago, they had kind of a change in leadership, and essentially, in my view, they gutted the museum and completely changed it over. Now they've moved it, but it has a completely different feel. So if you walk into there 12 years ago, 15 years ago, you get one sense of what Sheridan County was like over the last 100 years.
Mm-hmm.
You walk into it now, totally different view.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not making a judgment saying one is more true than the other, but it's your perspective and what you choose to focus on and what you choose to show and how you interpret. And I'll just throw this out there since we're briefly on the topic. Folks, keep that in mind when you read Scripture.
Yeah.
We have a 21st century mentality steeped in the way we do things and how we think, our worldview. And when you read that, it's 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years. Cultures were very, very different.
Sure.
And that needs to be taken into consideration.
No, I mean, I think that's absolutely a valid point because we often use history as the basis for our political arguments. And unless you have an accurate view of what happened, well, your whatever political argument that you're using, it's either true or it's not. And so you really got to understand it. And that's one of the reasons why I think that having a partisan person in charge of a library or in charge of a museum is a really, really dangerous thing. Because, how often do they take the school children over to the museum and say, hey, let's go for a field trip? And then you have the partisan person taking them around and saying how terrible, all of these, all of our founders are. And I mean, it's super, super dangerous. So really important that we point out these people who are partisans. So we're going to go ahead and take another break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about that communist in Michigan. Yay, fun. Back in a minute. The calendar says that it's summer, and you believe it. Oh, that's just so cute. But you obviously haven't lived here very long, have you? And you probably think that the weather is just going to continue to warm up. You don't have to worry about snow or ice or 30-degree temperatures anymore. In case you've forgotten, this is Wyoming, my friend, and that sort of thinking doesn't work here. 1 minute, it could be 75 and sunny, and 10 minutes later, snow. Whatever the weather, you need a pair of socks that'll keep your feet cool and dry even on the hottest of summer days. And if you happen to run into that spring snowstorm, you'll stay nice and toasty warm. Well, your feet anyway. To get you a pair, go to the website, thebuffalowoolco.com. Trust me, you won't be disappointed. These are the finest socks that I've ever put on my feet. Are you one of those people that said something like this before Trump became president?
I have a house in Spain that is going to be ready right after the election. Siberia.
Nova Scotia.
I'm definitely moving to Canada.
Straight to hell.
Iceland. France.
Asia's pretty cool.
And has the last year and a half been more than you could bear? Well, if it has, you've come to the right place. Call my friend Rebecca Bextel at eXp Realty. She has her fingers on the pulse of the real estate market all across the state of Wyoming. Last year, she sold around $30 million worth of property. Everything from small residential properties all the way up to big giant ranches. So if you've got to get the heck out of Dodge, if you've got to be gone Johnson because you can't stand that Trump is the president, call Rebecca Bextel. Her phone number is 307-699-3519. Let me say that one more time for you in case you missed it. 307-699-3519. Welcome back to the program. It's Cowboy State Politics Live on a Thursday. I'm David Iverson, doing what I was born to do with talent given to me by the man upstairs himself. And you know, my friends, you gotta be proud of the gifts that you were given. God gave them to you for a reason. And if you're not using them, well, you know, that might just be an insult to the big guy, and he doesn't take too kindly to that. I don't know. Read your Bible. It never works out that great. But fortunately for you, I am taking full advantage of it. So did you pay any attention to what happened in Michigan on Tuesday?
I tried not to.
Well, I mean, I think it's really important that we do because it signals where the Democrat Party is headed.
You can have a positive view of that they've stepped so far that it's going to be a problem, and I guess I don't quite share that view. But
well, I think that it is a dangerous precedent. Now, maybe you might say in Wyoming, wow, it doesn't really matter in Wyoming. This guy's in Michigan. He's 1,500 miles away or however far it is.
Michigan has a lot more control over what happens in the nation than Wyoming does.
This is true.
Yeah.
And if you haven't looked at all the candidates for office in Wyoming this year, the Democrats have a candidate in all 5 of the top 5 state elected races. Last election, they didn't. But they have a candidate in all of those, and they have candidates in many other districts. Not all of them. Like, Ken, you don't have a Democrat running against you this year. But in many districts, there are. And today, if you go look at the Wyoming Turkey Vulture, the Wyoming Tribune Eagle, there's at least half a dozen articles about Democrats running for various offices in Laramie County. Also, I would remind you of what happened over, not so much this summer, but last summer. All of the protests that were on the courthouse steps. When you can get 200 people, Democrats, on the courthouse steps in Sheridan, Wyoming, to hold signs with swastikas on them, something is happening. I have been arguing and telling you for a long time that the Democrat Party in Wyoming is ascendant. That is, they are gaining members, and it could be people moving from out of state. It could be just people who were formerly registered as Republicans now going back to the Democrat Party. Now, that part I think is a good thing. Because I think it leads to a much more honest political discussion. But the Democrat Party, without a doubt, all that taken into consideration, the Democrat Party is making a move in this state. Now, I don't think that they're going to win a lot of races this time. But what about the next cycle or the cycle after that? If the trend continues, I think it's very possible that you will see a lot more Democrats elected. But this guy in Michigan, Abdul al-Sayed. Now, his victory in Michigan, and it signals an anti-American turn for the Democrat Party. And I quote, this is from the Free Press. In 2008, Obama had to renounce his association with an anti-American preacher to win his party's nomination. That was the Reverend Jeremiah Wright, the GD America guy. In 2026, El-Sayed embraced his anti-American streaming star, and the Democrats didn't care. On Monday, Abdul El-Sayed's last day of campaigning to be the Democrat nominee for the Michigan Senate seat, being vacated by Gary Peters, one event stood out. It was a pool party that took place in Detroit where El-Sayed chatted amiably with the progressive influencer Hassan Piker and other content creators. They took selfies, they lounged around, they had drinks. Now, the question is, why would a candidate be seen in public with such a controversial figure? I mean, Hassan Piker has said that America deserved 9/11. I don't know that you could make a much more anti-American comment than that. Now here's an ad that and actually you can verify all the claims in this ad, but it was put out by the Mike Rogers campaign in Michigan. Go ahead and play it for us, Ken.
And what's funny about Mike Rogers is that
there's another one in there.
He's like the worst.
Here, maybe I've got it. Let's see here. Hold on. Just a second. Here we go. Watch this one.
Senate candidate in America. El-Sayed pledged support for the leader of the Muslim Brotherhood, a designated foreign terrorist group. He wants to hike taxes on waitresses, delivery drivers, and seniors on Social Security. He joined a sex offender and a murderer for making a mass release of dangerous prisoners. And when his ally claimed America deserved 9/11.
Hard to hear the audio. Well, anyway, in the audio, kind of hard to hear it. Okay, let's try it one more time. Let's see if the audio is any better from over there.
Abdul Rahman Muhammad El-Sayed, the most radical Senate candidate in America.
Pretty dangerous.
El-Sayed pledged support for the leader of the Muslim Brotherhood, a designated foreign terrorist group. He wants to hike taxes on Michigan waitresses, delivery drivers, and seniors on Social Security. He joined a sex offender and a murderer to demand the mass release of dangerous prisoners. And when his ally claimed America deserved 9/11,
America deserved 9/11, dude.
El-Sayed refused to disavow it.
I'm not here to disavow people's views.
Abdul El-Sayed, too radical, too dangerous, wrong for Michigan.
Okay, so anyway, it's a political ad, obviously, but you can verify all of those claims in it. Hassan Piker did say that America deserved 9/11, and that's probably one of the milder things that he said. He's very anti-American. He's very pro-Palestinian. He's one of these people that claims that Israel is committing genocide, which is a ridiculous claim. But this El-Sayed guy, he doesn't disavow him at all. So El-Sayed ribbed Hassan Piker for his recent trend of wearing suits, in contrast to the candidate's usual tight-fitting black T-shirt. Piker expressed wonder at all the social media clips he had seen of white dude bros that are so stoked to vote for you. And then the two discussed the media's full-on freakout over Piker's role in campaigning for El-Sayed during the final stretch. Now, if this were, I don't know, maybe 2 cycles ago, and there was such a radical guy like Hassan Piker campaigning for a candidate, I mean, that would be, back in the day, Ken, you probably remember this, but it was a big political thing if David Duke came out and endorsed a candidate. I mean, that created a big firestorm because the candidate would be after like, no, I don't have anything to do with David Duke. David Duke was the head of the KKK for a long time. But that was a big deal. If David Duke came out and said, I like this candidate, it was a major political problem for them. There were a couple of cases where that candidate ended up losing. But here we are, fast forward, 6 or 8 or 10 years, and you have a 9/11 truther or a guy that says America deserved 9/11 campaigning for you, and he wins a Senate campaign in one of the more influential states. Now, that's not to say that it was a blowout, because it wasn't. It was a squeaker election. Nonetheless, El-Sayed's narrow victory is the clearest sign yet that his party's old establishment is under siege. This populist turn began a decade ago when Senator Bernie Sanders, an independent from Vermont, surprised voters in the 2016 Democratic primary and nearly defeated Hillary Clinton. My guess is if the Democrat Party had allowed Bernie Sanders to enter the primary, he may very well have won. But it was the Democrat Party who told him no. It's replaced Joe Biden with Kamala Harris and all of those underhanded things. Well, there are some pretty influential people in the Democrat Party that are avowed socialists. And the Democrats have a history of using those folks for political purposes, but when it comes to leadership positions, when it comes to backing their campaigns, they tend to push them aside in favor of other candidates. So it's kind of, the friends of convenience sort of thing. Well, now that communists and Marxists have won a couple of elections, they're still a long ways away from El-Sayed winning a national election. But still, there's Mamdani in New York. There's that lady in Colorado. Excuse me, I didn't mean to misuse the word lady. There's a couple of other races where there are prominent Marxists that are running. Well, Sayed is the most prominent one of them. And all of this is a problem of the Democrat Party's making. Now, I don't know that they could have really avoided it too much because there have always been socialists in the Democrat Party. But it will not be that long until we see this type of candidate in Wyoming. Now, I think that here it will take much longer for that type of candidate to get any sort of support or ground game, just Wyoming being Wyoming. But that doesn't mean we should ignore what's happening. When you have people who are openly advocating for Marxist ideology, we should probably pay attention to that. Generally speaking, in Wyoming, things take a little bit longer to hit here. I always say that it's 2 to 3 years before something that happens in, on the national scene, perhaps on the East Coast or the other left coast, for those things to start showing up here. But they always do. And again, I mean, just look at your local Democrat Party. I mean, they're definitely on the upswing. And I don't think that there's, frankly, I think we're stupid to ignore them. So often we're used to worrying about the redcoats and the rhinos in the Republican Party, and they are a problem. And we ignore the Democrats who are gaining ground. Again, there is a Democrat candidate in all 5 of the statewide elected offices. There's way more Democratic candidates across the state. So you can't make the argument anymore that the Wyoming Democratic Party is irrelevant. Now, let's go back to the session. How much power, and we hear this argument from the redcoats all the time, and they use it to say, they say we vote with the Democrats. There's only 6 of them in the House. Well, on many, many votes, those 6 Democrats held an outsized amount of power. Here's what I mean. There are only, Ken, what's the conservative majority in the House? Is it 32, 34?
Yeah, it depends on how you define conservative, where you draw the line. But
how many votes did Chip Nyman get?
That I don't even remember. But I would say around 32 is probably a pretty good cut.
So we're just one vote over a majority. There are 62 members of the House of Representatives. And so whatever policy the redcoats want to put through, they have to have the support of the Democrats. If the Democrats say no, we're not going to support policy X, Y, or Z, then that policy has there's no chance whatsoever. And there are a couple of people on the most of the time conservative side that they might move a vote or two over to the other side, that they might go with the Democrats. It could be on spending. It could be on a social program. There's any number of things. But think about this. If those 6 Democrats say that they're not on board, that policy is going nowhere because they have to have those 6 votes. And so in the Wyoming House of Representatives, even though the Democrats are very much the minority party, they have an oversized influence. Am I wrong, Ken?
No, and on rare occasions, we've actually used them. I remember one particular bill that was teamed up between Liz Storer and John Baer. You thought the hell just froze over, but
yeah,
but sometimes that's the way that it plays. So they're kind of the swing vote, and they do wield an inordinate amount of power. Not just in that, but because of the rules of the House. And the rules say that on various committees you have to have at least one from each party.
Right.
And so they get very heavily assigned to.
Yeah, they are overworked big time. Overworked. I shouldn't put it that way.
Overrepresented.
Overrepresented, and they've got a lot more committees than any one of the conservatives. Now, Bonnie says, I'm going to put this comment up there, Ken, that rhinos are the bigger threat. And because people are naive enough to believe their lies. Okay, yeah, well, now I'm not saying that rhinos aren't a threat. They absolutely are in this election. We just did a whole segment on AFP's endorsed redcoats. What I'm arguing, however, is that you can't ignore the Democrat Party. Even in Wyoming, that I think to ignore them is a giant mistake. Last election, they didn't have a candidate in each of the top 5 races. Now they do. Last election, they didn't have, numerous candidates in legislative races. Now they do. Go look at the Turkey Vulture right now. That there are at least a half a dozen articles about Democrats running for various articles. A cycle or 2 cycles ago, you wouldn't have seen that. Because they're irrelevant. They're not going to win. But the difference here is I'm saying that the Democrat Party is on the rise. Now, are they as big of a problem as the Redcoats? No, for right now. But, next cycle, 2 cycles from here, they probably will be. And if conservatives ignore them, we do so at their peril.
Go back historically in Wyoming, and Democrats have always been a force.
Always. I mean, Wyoming does not have a Republican history. Read T.A. Larson's A History of Wyoming. Most of the people, if not all, at the Constitutional Convention were Democrats. Yeah, I know. There were several people that were registered Republicans. But Wyoming, for the most part, we've had a lot of Democrat governors. I would argue from 1977 all the way up to, into the 90s, we had a Democrat governor. Now, okay, there's Jim Geringer in there, but he really wasn't a conservative. I think you definitely chalk him up to be...
Dave Friedenthal was after 2000, and he was a Democrat.
Okay, so much further than that. We had a span of, a lot of Democrat governors. Don't think that it can't happen again. In fact, before the broadcast, Ken and I were talking about this, that I think that there are a number of districts that if you had a solid Democrat candidate who wasn't a wacko, he wasn't in favor of all this, Medicaid expansion stuff.
Maybe a little old-fashioned blue dog.
Yeah, something like that. I think that you could absolutely have a solid chance. One of those counties, though I hate to admit it, is probably Johnson County. Definitely Laramie County. Definitely Albany County. Well, they already have a Democrat. Probably in Casper, I would say there's at least a district or two that if you were a good Democrat candidate, you could probably win that. So it's not that there isn't a Democrat influence. We know that they have an outsized influence in and look at the Senate. Okay, the Senate has 2 Democrats in it. Who ran appropriations for the Senate side? It wasn't Tim Salazar.
No, it wasn't.
It was pretty much
Mike Giroux in there, and
Kangaroo Mike Giroux.
Yeah, and one of those people, a little bit like Ogden, that when you meet them, they seem kind of unassuming, but they wield a tremendous amount of power.
Yeah, and here's the other thing to remember: you don't have to have a D at the end of your name to be a Democrat. And that's, in the 6 years of Cowboy state politics, that has been my argument the entire time. That if it walks like a Democrat, if it votes like a jackass, if it talks like a jackass, it's a Democrat.
Yeah, if Brent doesn't pull this out and win, we're going to have a Democrat governor next.
Absolutely. I mean, there is no difference, except for the letter at the end of his name, between Eric Barlow and the Democrat Party. I mean, just watch his ads. I mean, over and over and over last night when I was trying to, I was doing show prep and trying to watch a program, and it was just one ad over after another. And it was healthcare, and it was spending on education. I'm going to spend more. These people that say we can cut stuff, well, they don't know what they're talking about. On and on and on. So, my friends, do not discount the Democrat Party in this state. Don't disregard them because, this election, they're probably not going to win that much. They are ascending, and if conservatives ignore them, they do so at their own peril. So we're going to take our last break, and when we come back, we'll finish up the program. Are you sick to death of being told what to think? Maybe you don't even realize that it's happening. Freedom Caucus bad, big spending, big government, liberal, Republican good. Conservatives are bad and they want to starve little children. I have heard it all, my friends. We are way past the time when the news was just the news, if it ever was. But wouldn't it be nice if you had a news platform that was at least honest about what they were telling you? News on the news page, opinion on the opinion page. That's exactly what the Open Range Record is. Go to the website, openrangerecord.com. News, analysis, opinion, and investigative journalism. One more time, that website is openrangerecord.com.
I'm completely fed up with the ongoing, unnecessarily high increases in property taxes, and I bet you are too. I'm Carla Cayley, and I'm running for county commissioner. Let me tell you why. I want lower property taxes for all property owners. Tax reform is possible without compromising essential county services, which is the only reason local government exists in the first place. Think about it. Do you have any more or any better essential services today than you had 5 years ago when your taxes were about 40% lower? Right. You get it. Your tax dollars are being spent on more than just essential services. We're already paying around 70 mills in taxes. That's right, 70 mills, which is a lot. I am pro-citizen, pro-business, and pro-taxpayer. Without compromising any essential services, together we can lower taxes for all of Sheridan County. I'm Carla Cayley, and I'm asking for your vote on August 18th. Paid for by the committee to elect Carla Cayley.
You can listen and watch Cowboy State Politics live on YouTube, Facebook, X, and on Rumble every Tuesday through Friday from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. Pay attention to all that other block-headed, Borg-like so-called news if you want. But if you want to get the real story, watch Cowboy State Politics live. And now, back to the program. Welcome back to the program, Cowboy State Politics Live. It's Thursday. I'm David Iverson, documented to be almost always right 99% of the time. Welcome back to the program. I see that we have a viewer from Indiana. Hi, honey. All right. So, are you tired of all the mailers that are hitting your mailbox? Tired of the television ads?
Well, I sure am.
Well, I know you are because you're the subject of most of them. But I think that I know I'm sick of them, and I kind of collect them. But sometimes negative advertising, negative campaigning, sometimes it backfires. And there's a piece by Jonathan Lang out. It actually came out on Friday. I just haven't got to it yet. But here's what Pastor Lang says, and I quote, "All individuals are endowed by their Creator from the moment of conception to the moment of natural death with the rights of life, liberty, property, and the pursuit of happiness. The only purpose of government is to protect these rights for all." Now, that's the very first plank of the Wyoming Republican Party platform. So it's weird that anybody would attack a Republican candidate for agreeing with it. But that's what happened last week. Glossy flyers landed in mailboxes across the state, faulting Republicans for voting in favor of the Human Heartbeat Act. That was House Bill 126, if you want to look it up. According to pro-abortion activist Britt Boyle, the flyers landed in about 23 districts. Now, that's a fair amount of money. In fact, you can do the ad 23 times. We'll just be generous and say 4. That's how much money it cost. According to, let's see here, Lang says he would guess that it's about $150,000. I think he's north of what the actual number is. All spent to trumpet that Republicans fulfilled their promise to uphold and defend the Wyoming Constitution. I couldn't find wyounited.org on the Secretary of State's website and was unable to figure out who paid for it exactly. Now, he says, "I'm no campaign strategist, but if you ask me, that money would have been better, more effectively spent in the general election where abortion happens to be the wedge issue. In Wyoming, it functioned more like ponied up the dough for these flyers. The Human Heartbeat Act is based entirely on the Wyoming Constitution, and it is based, I would say, on the Republican Party platform. From there, it moves to an even more foundational principle. The second section of Wyoming's Declaration of Rights, Article 1, Section 2 of the Wyoming Constitution, recognizes that all members of the human race have an equal right to life and states the obvious, that human children are members of the human race." So why is it that obviously radically left group, political action committee, advocacy group, whatever, why would they spend that amount of money in a primary election? Well, I mean, they've obviously misjudged the temperament of the state. Advertisement probably backfired in a lot of different places. If they sent it to 23 districts, which is roughly, a third of the House districts anyway, roughly, many of those are very, very much pro-life. That if you're a candidate and you don't agree that abortion and killing babies is bad, you're probably not going to win. And yet, this political action committee sent out a mailer, to 23 different districts, and spending, I would say, probably this year. I'll tell you what my estimate is of. Come on, there we go. 23 times 4. I think they spent about $100,000 on those ads. So still spending $100,000 to advertise for Republicans, really a bad move. But I think that it points to, this is a gross example. But, I think that they probably advertised for conservative candidates and convinced fewer. Now, there are other campaign tactics that I think also backfire. Ken, you mentioned a couple times this morning how you've talked to people, in your door-to-door that just said, hey, go put a sign in my yard. I'm sick of all this stuff. In smaller communities, everybody knows each other. And so when a crazy ad shows up that says, Ken Pendergraft wants to kick little puppies and kill children, most people know that that's not true.
People might believe that one.
Well, the puppies part, maybe.
What you just said there, I think, is an important thing, and I think I've made that point before. AFP is one of the agencies that turned Colorado blue. And when they did that, a state house rep in Colorado is much more distant and remote from the public than here in Wyoming.
For sure.
So I've had, as you mentioned, I've had a number of people in my neighborhood come by and say, "What gives? This isn't you. This is ridiculous.
It's insane.
It's not even believable."
Well, and yesterday, this little guy blew up all day long with text messages from a variety of different candidates, and the same candidates that I've received 4 or 5 mailers from, and all of them are pretty outrageous. Now let's clear up the Colorado thing for a little bit. Now I think that indirectly, Americans for Prosperity helped turn Colorado blue. There were a lot of forces at play there, and here's how I think that it worked out. Oh man, and I just forgot her name. Pat Stryker. Pat Stryker was one of the billionaires that provided most of the funding in the effort to turn Colorado blue. Well, Pat Stryker is also friends with the other people, some of whom fund Americans for Prosperity. So I think that's where your link is. But if you compare that to what they're doing in Wyoming, I think there's no question that they were involved. I mean, look at all of the cash that they're spending here. Absolutely, I think that's true. Now, Lang goes on to say that 50 Republicans in the House of Representatives and 1 Democrat affirmed the findings by voting yes, that is, on the Human Heartbeat Act. Only 2 Republicans opposed it, Bob Nicholas and Andrew Byron. On the Senate side, it was equally lopsided. The only Republicans who joined the 2 Democrats were Cale Case and Charlie Scott. Lawyers, teachers, ranchers, businessmen, retired military, and law enforcement officers all brought their knowledge and expertise to the floor to support passage of the Human Heartbeat Act. Many represented constituencies that were so strongly in favor of the legislation that it would have been a political harakiri to vote against it. All told, 78 out of 82 Republicans supported that bill. So the advertisement sent to 23 districts probably was not nearly as effective as they had hoped. And I think that one of the reasons why Pastor Lang says that mailer would have been more effective in the general election is that's the one where you have the Democrats versus the Republicans. Most Democrats are in favor of abortion, most Republicans are not. And so that wedge issue probably would have been way more effective there. But I think that his argument, while it is only constrained to that 1 mailer, I think it holds true for the majority of them. I talked to a lot of candidates about campaign advertising and, on the program or whatever. And, many of them have said, well, we're wondering if we've done enough. And by that, I think they mean that we've got our point across. We've got the message. We don't need to pound people over the head. And me, I'm one of those people that I go vote on Election Day. That's one of the things that the lovely Christine and I do together. And, I've always voted that way. But that doesn't mean that I haven't already made up my mind, probably way before. And, having the job that I have, I know most of these people. And so I probably made up my decision in June or before the filing period. But that doesn't mean that it can't change. There's always political surprises that crop up. And I haven't seen one of those yet. In Wyoming politics, there is always an August surprise somewhere. I don't know where it's going to show up, but I haven't seen it yet.
They tried with Brent, but that attempt kind of makes the point we've been trying to make here for the last few minutes. People that know Brent know that's not the case.
That's not him.
It doesn't fit. So.
Well, and and there are examples. Like one of them, I think, was, and this was several years ago, but when Mark Jennings was running for the House, it might be his first or second time, the Sheridan Press did a full page front page above the fold ad that tried to make this funding conspiracy look like it was all dark money. And it really did look like a spider web. There was ads on KROE, how, basically accusing Mark of being a murderer. So it's not that Wyoming is immune to outrageous ads. As Alan Simpson always said, in Wyoming, everything is politics, except for politics. That's personal. There was an attack ad yesterday that featured yours truly. Called me a false prophet.
Yeah.
Whatever.
You were in pretty good company, though.
Yeah, well, yeah. It was with all the conservatives. Didn't bother me a bit.
I've mentioned several times back in the early 80s, I don't remember if it was 82 or 84, probably 84, I was working with Russ Donnelly on a gubernatorial campaign, and Casper Star Tribune completely made up a story about fraud, published it, got the poll results back to where they wanted them to be, and then
issued their retraction on page A52.
That killed the campaign that was really gaining traction.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's what happens in campaigns. But, I think that Ken makes a good point that now people are far more aware of what's happening. The internet is so pervasive that, you would pretty much have to not be on the internet at all to be completely ignorant of all of this stuff. Though, there are those people, but I think that people are more informed. Information is easier to get. There's far more media sources available. And so I think that, perhaps we've stemmed that tide a little bit.
So you mentioned text. This is one of the ones that I got yesterday.
Oh, yeah.
It says, Wyoming deserves facts, not political games. The Freedom Caucus promised limited government, but their votes cut funding for rural schools, emergency services, and UW. Those are all government agencies, and by making them smaller, we would have cut government.
Right.
Limited government. But it's also the Freedom Caucus, and this never gets mentioned. It's also the Freedom Caucus that fought pretty hard for a backfill.
Yes.
To take care of those.
Which I opposed, by the way.
Yeah. Regardless of where you stand, the facts, you talk about history.
Yep.
History is not an accurate representation. And it goes on with some other stuff, which is just, it's more of the same. They just take their marching orders from some DC group, and it's
yeah. So listen to this one. You'll love this one, Ken.
I have to.
Ken Pendergraft stands with Jackson billionaires and the Freedom Caucus's extreme agenda.
Yep, I do.
I kind of figured you would go with that. Instead of fighting for Wyoming families and small businesses, he'll vote the Freedom Caucus line and cut programs that our communities rely on. Vote no on Ken Pendergraft, paid for WYO for Business, whatever that is. Yeah. Hey, Melissa Butcher, we got your text message. Okay, so do I think that Melissa Butcher put this out? Probably not, but she's the beneficiary of it.
She's been the beneficiary of
a lot,
dozens.
Man, I can't even count them.
Even, we've mentioned this before too. In debate, she said, yeah, that really was not a fair representation. But she has not stood up and asked them to stop. She has not made any point of that. She just sits back and takes it.
In fact, there's the article I wrote, who actually votes against Wyoming Energy and the candidates they support. I specifically asked Melissa Butcher, so have you called Tyler Lindholm and said, knock it off? And she says, oh, I can't do that. And I said, yes, you can. There isn't a Wyoming law that prevents you from saying, hey, knock it off. Now, if you were to coordinate with Tyler Lindholm, that would be different. But telling him to shut his yap, yeah, that's that's not against the law either. But she told me in the phone call, yeah, I'm probably not going to do that. We know why. Because you're the beneficiary.
It's their only hope. It always amazes me that they come out and try to talk about, I'm running as a conservative, or I'm conservative. I'm the whatever conservative.
Yeah.
I don't know how to say this and not sound arrogant. If you want conservative, you're looking at him.
Yeah.
If you're going to run, you've got to say I'm not that conservative, which kind of is what they're doing.
Well, it's kind of what they're doing, and that word conservative really doesn't mean anything too much anymore because everybody uses it, and that's by the way, that's part of the leftist strategy is to take words and either make them meaningless or to change the meaning of them.
1984, double plus ungood.
Yep, double plus ungood, exactly. All right, my friends. Well, we pretty much burned up, another busy broadcast hour on the program. We'll be back tomorrow with Open Line Friday. Make sure you don't miss it. We're in the home stretch, my friends, and there is probably going to be more election shenanigans. So stick with me. I'll see you tomorrow. Have a good afternoon. This is Cowboy State Politics.